Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, the so-called vigilante who shot and killed 2 men and grievously injured a third during the riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the death of Jacob Blake last summer, entered its second week on Monday. The prosecution called to the stand Gage Grosskreutz, who was shot by Rittenhouse but survived. This did not go as planned, as Grosskreutz was very effectively cross-examined by Rittenhouse's attorney, Kyle Rittenhouse. If anything, it seems likely that Grosskreitz's answer would tend to support Rittenhouse's contention that he acted in self-defense. Indeed, while the most anyone can do is speculate, I think there are good reasons to expect the trial will culminate in an acquittal, a verdict that will probably cause mass media meltdown, and also among Democratic politicians who have already branded Rittenhouse a domestic terrorist. Now, let me explain. Rittenhouse was 17 years old at the time of the shootings and lived in Antioch, Illinois, a mile south of the Wisconsin border. On August 23, 2020, Kenosha police had shot Blake, a black man, during a confrontation with his girlfriend. Blake, who had a warrant out for his arrest on sexual assault charges, disobeyed police orders and instead walked over to his girlfriend's vehicle. Police claimed they feared he was reaching for a weapon and opened fire. Now, Blake did indeed have a knife, and the authorities declined to bring charges against the police for that reason. Blake survived the encounter but was paralyzed. Coming just a few weeks after the police shooting of George Floyd, the Blake incident generated mass protests and considerable violence in Kenosha, with protesters setting cars and buildings on fire. By the night of August 25th, armed militia groups were patrolling the city in an attempt to stop the riots. Rittenhouse ventured into Kenosha armed with a medical kit and an AR-15 semi-automatic assault rifle that had been acquired for him by a friend since Rittenhouse was too young to legally purchase it. His stated purpose was to defend small businesses under threat of arson and looting. He was eventually surrounded by protesters during a series of encounters. Now, video footage of the encounters showed Rittenhouse trying to move away from them. But after a warning shot was fired by another man, then Rittenhouse turned back and engaged a man named Jason Rosenbaum, who was a protester who then did try to grab Rittenhouse's gun. Rittenhouse shot him 4 times, killing him. Rittenhouse was then chased by protesters. He tripped and fell and was attacked by a man named Anthony Huber, who struck him with a skateboard. Rittenhouse shot and killed him as well. He then shot Grosskreutz, who was armed with a gun and moving toward him. Rittenhouse was charged with reckless homicide, intentional homicide, and attempted homicide for those 3 shootings. There are also 3 other charges. His attorneys have argued that he merely acted in self-defense and rationally feared for his life in each of those 3 instances. Now, Grosskreutz may have inadvertently made that argument more plausible for the jury. So when he was cross-examined yesterday by the defense, he confirmed that Rittenhouse did not shoot him until after he had pointed his own handgun at Rittenhouse.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 67. That's a photo of you, yes?
Yes.
Okay. That's Mr. Rittenhouse?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you'd agree your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And once your firearm is pointed at Mr. Rittenhouse, that's when he fires his gun. Yes?
No.
Sir, look, I don't want to... Does this look like right now your arm is being shot?
That looks like my bicep being vaporized, yes.
Okay. And it's being vaporized as you're pointing your gun directly at him. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so when you were standing 3 to 5 feet from him with your arms up in the air, he never fired, right?
Correct.
It wasn't until you pointed your gun at him, advanced on him, with your gun, now your hands down, pointed at him, that he fired, right?
Correct.
Many in the media have focused the case against Rittenhouse on the fact that he foolishly chose to inject himself into a chaotic situation where trouble was assured. He didn't belong there, and thus he bears some responsibility for the deaths. Now, it's perfectly fine to scrutinize Rittenhouse's rationale and to lay moral blame for what happened at his feet. But his self-defense claim has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. It is only about whether he reasonably believed he was in danger at the moment he fired those shots. Grosskreitz's testimony gives significant credence to Rittenhouse's contention that such a belief was valid. It's impossible to say for certain how the trial will conclude, of course, but if Rittenhouse is acquitted, it will not necessarily be because the justice system is broken, but rather because the prosecution failed to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that Rittenhouse's actions were unreasonable at the moments they occurred. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and the prosecution just made the task of proving Rittenhouse guilty quite a bit harder for themselves. So I wanted to talk about this because there's been so much, the way Rittenhouse is described in the mainstream media, domestic terrorist, vigilante, that, as if he was like hunting these people for sport. And I want to be perfectly clear that I think it was a terrible idea to venture into this situation, and you can absolutely think that was the wrong call. You can be very upset about what happened, but he is claiming self-defense in the moment those 3 shootings occurred, that he did fear for his life because he was under attack, and that none of the rest of that matters. That like why he was there is not, it doesn't matter anything from the standpoint of Wisconsin law.
Right.
So it just matters whether his fear in the moment was reasonable. And that testimony was, I think, pretty. I mean, there were pictures of like the prosecution guy had his head in his desk after he had said this, because Rittenhouse didn't point his gun to shoot him until he was like this. And then when Grosskreutz did point the gun, that's when he got shot. So I want the media, I think, needs to prepare itself for an acquittal here on like on those actual facts, which I think are much more favorable to Rittenhouse than we've heard about. And it's not going to be because they refuse to hold this. We have a right-wing justice system that refused to hold a domestic terrorist accountable. It's because they're actually the facts of this case are much more favorable to Rittenhouse than you've heard. Right.
Multiple things can be true at the same time. One is that if he had never shown up with a weapon, with an assault rifle,
absolutely,
at this event, none of this happens. That can be true. Then you can say from a legal perspective, each one of the particular shootings likely probably does lead to acquittal on self-defense grounds. The first victim, Rosenbaum, seemed to be one of these people struggling with mental health issues who just vaguely connects himself to protests. If you've been to a lot of protests, you see people like this who are just there, and they're sort of, they're maybe vaguely supportive of whatever the protest is advocating for, but they're also clearly just off. And a lot of people have described him as being extremely aggressive and unpredictable. And people have testified at the trial that he came at Rittenhouse, lunged for his gun, and said he was going to take his gun and kill him with it.
Right.
And so a jury hearing that probably going to say, okay, that if I were in that situation, what would I do? Now, I wouldn't be in that situation, but if I were in that situation, what would I do? Then he starts running, and so the second victim, who hit him.
He hit him with a skateboard.
Hit him with a skateboard. I think, we won't know because he's no longer here to tell us a story. But it is very plausible that he thought that this is an active shooter situation, and he felt that by attacking Rittenhouse with a skateboard, he was going to risk his own life to save the lives of other people. And he have every reason to believe the guys. There's just been shots fired, multiple shots fired, and now you see a guy running with an assault weapon. You think this is an active shooter, and I think it showed courage to without his own weapon to. Now it turns out that he was not necessarily an active shooter. He was not looking. He was not hunting people down. But then from Rittenhouse's perspective, now this guy's trying to take his gun from him and hitting him with a skateboard, and so he shoots and he shoots him. So again, you could see the jury being like, okay.
The other guy's belief that it's an understandable belief that it's an active shooter situation doesn't speak to the self-defense claim that Rittenhouse is making.
And then the third, Grosskreutz.
Right, we actually got to hear from him because he survived, and
there's video of all of this too.
Right,
and you see Grosskreutz with his arms up like this at one point, and then kind of point his gun at him, which fits with this testimony which he has claimed is not true, that he wishes he had shot him. He said that he'd never told his friend that. But then you have him admitting, like, yes, I was pointing my gun at him when he shot me, and yeah, you saw. And again, he may have also thought that this was an active shooter situation, and that he was protecting and saving people's lives.
And if he'd shot someone, he could have made the self-defense claim for his. But it so happens this is the person's on trial.
I bet if he did shoot Rittenhouse, that he would successfully be able to make a self-defense claim.
Right.
Because you see somebody running through the streets with a weapon that's pointed at him, like the weapon was pointed at him, and so I could very easily see the jury saying, "Okay, you admitted you were pointing the gun at him."
Yeah.
At that, which, this is why everybody shouldn't have guns at protests, and and also it says something about the multiracial nature of this movement, that all 4 of these people involved are white.
Right. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, there's even in sloppy, like, that he's a white nationalist terrorist because he was shooting black, but he wasn't shooting. The people who died were other white people. So there's been laziness in the media. So I want the media to prepare itself for, there very well may be an acquittal, and then there's going to be, I'm preparing myself for the terrible coverage that will ensue of this, about how this is ignorant of the facts and the reasons why he's being acquitted.
And people are. And one reason people are prepared or not prepared, I think people are cynically do believe that there'll be an acquittal, but they don't believe there ought to be one, is because of the way he was treated immediately after the shooting. The cops just let him walk right past him. Then he's allowed to go home. Then he's treated kindly by the cops when he gets down to it, which we should all acknowledge is not how a black shooter would have been treated in that situation. Anyway, it's going to be a mess because I do think an acquittal on these charges is coming, and I think a conviction on illegal possession and all these other reckless endangerment, those other charges.
Right.
So Team Rising is going to join us next, and we'll have more for you very soon. Stick around.